Hey, pull up a chair for a minute. We're in the back of a quiet restaurant tonight. The kind of place that looks harmless from the street. Warm lights in the windows. A few people lingering over dessert. Candles burning low on every table. You've probably been somewhere like this. Maybe on a first date. Maybe one of those nights where you tell yourself, it's just dinner. What's the worst that could happen? That's what I've been thinking about lately. I've read a lot of your stories. I hear a lot of things on true crime podcasts. And there's this pattern I can't ignore anymore. Predators rarely look dangerous at first. They may even be charming, but at some point in the night, there's this tiny moment where your stomach tightens for just a second. You hear that little voice saying, something's wrong here. I want you to remember that feeling tonight. I hope you're ready for this. I don't use dating apps anymore, and this is the reason. A few years ago, I was in that phase where everyone around me seemed to be in a relationship and kept asking why I was still single. I wasn't miserable, but I figured I might as well try dating again. So I downloaded a local dating app. Nothing serious, just something to see what was out there. That's where I matched with him. At first, there was nothing alarming. His profile was normal, decent photos, no shirtless mirror selfies. He lived nearby, worked a steady job, and seemed articulate enough in messages. We talked for a couple of weeks before meeting. Mostly small talk, work complaints, movies, nothing that raised alarms. We met once, for coffee, in the middle of the afternoon. The date itself wasn't terrible. It just felt off. He asked very intense questions very early on, not inappropriate, just oddly personal for a first meeting. Things like whether I lived alone, how long I'd been at my current place, whether I usually walked or drove places. At the time, I brushed it off as awkwardness or nerves. When the date ended, he lingered. He hugged me longer than I expected. He texted me before I even made it back to my car. That night, I realized I didn't want a second date. I sent a polite message the next day, saying I didn't feel a romantic connection. He replied quickly. He said he understood and wished me well. It seemed mature. I was relieved. Then he kept messaging. At first it was light stuff, checking in, asking how my week was going. I responded a little, trying not to be rude. Then the messages became more frequent. If I didn't answer for a few hours, he'd send another one, then another. If I replied once, he'd immediately respond with multiple texts in a row. There was an edge to it that made me uneasy. He'd make comments about how people always disappeared on him, how it messed with his head, how honesty was important. I didn't want to provoke anything. I know now that blocking would have been the smarter move, but at the time, I was worried about how he'd react. So instead, I did the slow fade, short replies, longer gaps. Eventually, I stopped opening the messages altogether. After a while, they stopped coming. Weeks passed, then months. I started to relax. I figured he'd moved on. People do. Then, one night, everything snapped back into focus. It was early winter, cold enough that the air hurt when you breathed it in. I'd stayed late at work and was walking home along my usual route. It was a side street with closed shops and dim streetlights, but I'd walked it hundreds of times. I noticed someone coming toward me from the other end of the block. At first, I didn't think anything of it. Then, As we got closer, he slowed down and stopped directly in front of me. It took a second for my brain to register his face. When it did, my stomach dropped. It was him. Same voice when he said my name. Same calm tone. Like this was a coincidence. I remember thinking, how does he know I walk here? He didn't touch me, didn't shout, just stood there, blocking the sidewalk. He smiled and said something like, I figured this would be the easiest place to run into you. I didn't know what to say. My mouth went dry. I asked what he meant, even though I already knew. He said he'd been worried since I'd stopped replying, that he wanted to check in on me, like this was reasonable behavior. I stepped sideways to go around him. He shifted with me. That's when panic really hit. I walked faster. He followed for a few steps, still talking, asking why I'd ignored him, saying I'd misunderstood him, telling me I didn't need to be afraid. I broke into a run. I didn't go home. I ran to the nearest convenience store and stayed there longer than I needed to, pretending to browse. My hands were shaking so badly, I couldn't hold my phone steady. I kept checking the windows. When I finally left, I took a completely different route and went straight to a friend's apartment. I stayed there that night. Over the next few days, I changed everything. Different routes, different times. I blocked him on the app, then on my phone. A week later, a coworker casually mentioned that someone had tried to add her on social media. She showed me the profile. It was him. She didn't even know his name. He only knew hers because I'd mentioned her once in passing during that coffee date. That was when I went to the police. Nothing dramatic came of it. No charges, no confrontation. But they took a report and told me to call if I saw him again. I never did. But even now, years later, I still notice when someone lingers too long behind me. I still avoid that street in winter. And I don't believe anyone who says being too polite can get you into trouble. I met Amy back in the summer of 2001. I matched with her on Tinder. She had a simple profile. I found out that her husband passed away in a road accident. She has 2 children, a boy in junior high school and a girl who goes to kindergarten. After talking for a couple of weeks, we decided to meet up one night for a drink. She said that her daughter was staying with her parents, so she had a rare, free night. We spoke about so many different things. The conversation really flowed well, and I was enjoying myself a lot. I was into her. Then her phone began to ring. It was her son. She said that he sounded really agitated, and he was asking for her to come home as soon as possible. As soon as she finished explaining this to me, he called back again. She said he was scared of something at home. We had had plans for later that evening too, if you get my drift. So I was a little bummed out that our night was over. I thought it would have been pretty weird if I went back with her for her kid too. So I decided that I would stay at the bar and drink some more. She called me while I was still in the bar. This is what happened to her son. He said that he didn't have his mom or sister at home that night. He was enjoying eating whatever he wanted and playing some video games. After a few hours, he heard a huge thud at the front door. He said that he'd locked the door after Amy, his mom, left for our date. He said he even put the chain on, but when he came downstairs to check on what that huge noise was, the door was slightly open, yet the chain was still on. He thought that it was his mom who'd come back home early. He stood there, staring at the door when he heard something hammer against it again. He involuntarily called out, "Mom?" But there was no response. He was really frightened at this point and didn't know what to do. He peered through the gap in the door and then through the peephole, but he couldn't see anyone out there. He was so petrified by all of this that he called his mother. Since he was in junior high school and it was 2001, he didn't have a cell phone. Amy told me that the way their house was laid out, you couldn't see the door from where the corded home phone was. After he called her the first time, the door was being hit again and again. He hid behind the sofa as the door opened and slammed shut. He couldn't stand that awful noise. Just as he felt the tears welling in his eyes, the banging at the door ceased. Relieved that it was seemingly over, he got up from his hiding place to check on the damage, and then froze in place. The door was wide open. Someone was in the house with him. He was certain of it. He moved as swiftly and as silently as he could to the kitchen, and he grabbed a kitchen knife, headed back to the lounge, and called his mom for the second time. Amy rushed home as fast as she could. She said it took about 20 minutes to get back. When she got home, the door was shut. The door was unlocked, but when she pushed it open, she found that the chain was on. She was terrified for her son, so she called out to him through the gap in the door. When no response came, she called the home phone from her cell. The lonely sound of the home phone ringing echoed through the house. She was hammering on the door and screaming his name, pushing with all her might to open it, but of course it wouldn't budge. She was making so much noise that it alerted the neighbors, who gathered to watch the drama unfold. As she was explaining things, she heard her son call from the house, "Mom, is that really you?" Shortly after, he unlocked the door. After he called her the second time, he ran to the bathroom and locked the door. He was sat in there, shaking in fear for his life. He said that someone tried to open the door, and when they couldn't, instead of knocking, they tapped it repeatedly. He was so frightened that even when he heard his mother banging on the door, he couldn't bring himself to leave the bathroom until he knew with 100% certainty that it was her. I heard all this from Amy when I met up with her a second time. Apparently, this isn't the first time something like this has happened. Her daughter has never complained or experienced anything like it. It's always happened when her son was home alone. However, this was the first time he'd been this frightened. He was inconsolable that night. He slept in her bed. She wondered if what occurred was something paranormal. Something might have attached itself to her son. I asked her not to rule out the possibility that he could have been doing this for attention, since she left to go on a date. But later I reconsidered this, as something didn't seem quite right about it. When her son saw the door wide open after the second call, he didn't say that he shut it. So at any point from the moment he locked himself in the bathroom, someone could have gotten in. Someone might have been in the house. Someone might have been in there until a point when things quietened down and then left. But why though? It's something unexplainable for sure. Make sure your doors are locked. It starts with, "He seems nice." Normal messages, a normal date. The scariest people often show up as average or charming, And they don't usually blow past your boundaries all at once. They nudge them, little by little. Small things that are easy to explain away. There was no one huge moment in this story that shifted things, but a series of smaller ones. The constant messages, the funny coincidence of running into him, the anger when she doesn't reply the way he wants. It doesn't matter who you tell, I'm still here. That's what stalking feeds on, access and silence. They're counting on you to stay polite. They're counting on you not wanting to cause a scene. They're counting on you second-guessing yourself, telling yourself you're overreacting. She got through it because she didn't play along with that script. She documented it. She told the police. She got the police involved. She treated it like what it was, dangerous. In the next story, the situation becomes even more vulnerable. This isn't a story about a bad date, but rather what they witnessed on that date. This happened when I was 25. Back then, I had a girlfriend. This story takes place in her apartment. It was hers, but I was there often. I even had a key. So, it was Valentine's Day. Our plans had been scuppered because her douche of a boss was making her work late again. But I was determined to give her a decent Valentine's Day. So I bought a load of ingredients and found a great recipe. I was ready to give it my all, even though she knew I was a bad cook. It's the thought that counts though, right? So I let myself in, and I sit on the sofa, staring at the ingredients and trying to figure out how I was going to go about it. Then I heard the doorbell ring. Awesome, she's getting off early after all, I thought as I went to answer the door. I didn't bother to look through the peephole since I was excited to see her. But when I opened the door, I saw a middle-aged man staring back at me. He was dressed as if he'd just come from work. A salesperson maybe, going door to door. That wasn't quite right though. He was in chinos and a polo shirt. When he saw me answer the door, he looked astounded. I remember he just kept blinking repeatedly. He didn't say anything. "Hey, what can I do for you, bud?" I asked. "Isn't this Aki Kawada's apartment?" He stammered. "That's my girlfriend's name." "Yeah, that's right. What do you need?" His eyes narrowed. He cleared his throat and said, "I'm Aki Kawada's father. Who the hell are you?" I went completely blank. I didn't know what to say. I mean, we'd been dating for about 3 or 4 months, and it was going so well. But I still hadn't been introduced to the family, and she really hadn't mentioned them. I was in love with her, and I wanted to show that I was serious about her when I eventually would meet her family. I just wasn't expecting today to be the day. I muttered. I was panicking a bit. He took his shoes off and went into the apartment and sat on the sofa. I had no idea what to do next, so I spent a couple of minutes pacing around by the door. He stood up and caught me doing this and gave me a weird look. There was an awkward silence. "I think Misaki will be back later than usual tonight, I'm afraid," I said. Did I say miss? Geez, I thought. I was trying to be as polite as possible. No reply. He just glared at me. It looked like he hated me. Was, Aki expecting you today? She was asked to stay later at the office tonight, and I'm sure that she wouldn't want to keep you waiting, I said. It was like the anger was rising in him. His fists started to clench. Still no reply. It was like he was ignoring me completely. Then he suddenly got to his feet. I didn't know what this guy was going to do. He still had his fists clenched. I had to prepare for what I thought was going to be an attack. Still ignoring me, he then rushed into her bedroom and started rummaging around in there. Her father was going through her dresser drawers by the time I got to the bedroom. He had his hands in her underwear drawer. I was thinking, well, they're family. Maybe he loaned her something and he needed it back or whatever. I mean, I was trying to convince myself that this was normal. But deep down, I knew that something was wrong. What could I say, though? He's still there, rummaging around, and then he spots a framed photo of Aki and I. He stops completely and snatches it up. It's a photo of Aki and I at an amusement park, a selfie I took, and I'm kissing her on the cheek. It was super awkward. He had a hold of the photo, and he walked towards me. I thought, yeah, he's gonna hit me, or at least yell at me. But he just walks back over to his shoes, puts them on, and leaves, still not saying a word. It was like he lost his vocal cords or didn't want to speak in the apartment. Where has he gone? To get smokes or something? Is he coming back? I don't want to deal with her dad again tonight, if that was his attitude towards me. I just tried to get cooking and keep my mind off of it. I go over and double lock the door. I didn't want him to burst in whenever he felt like it. After about 40 minutes, the door shakes with the impact of someone trying to open it. Oh God, I thought, as I peer over towards the door nervously. Why is the door locked? Aki calls out. She's back. I run over and give her a hug. What's up? What's the matter? She asked. I guess she could tell I was stressed. Nothing really. Just your dad was here. He's a pretty intense guy. Aki looked at me. A look between irritation and sadness is the only way I can describe it. Don't say that. Is this a joke? She asked. No, he was here. I guessed that they'd fallen out or something, but then she said, that's not funny. My dad died back when I was in elementary school. I stood there, just completely gobsmacked. I described him to her, and she confirmed that he looked and acted completely different to the man I had met. I'm certain that the man was up to something sinister that night. What was really creepy was the way he knew where everything was in her apartment. It was as if he had been there before. He took the photo of Aki and I guess he could have taken something from her underwear drawer when I wasn't in the room with him. Needless to say, I gave the offer to Aki to move in with me right away, and we got her moved into a new place shortly after that fateful Valentine's Day. If I wasn't there, if she had finished work on time, who knows what would have happened that day. This one hurts in a different way. You're listening from the perspective of a child. Notice how the horror builds. There was no dramatic chase scene, just someone trying to intrude into what should be the safest place on Earth. Home is supposed to be your fortress. Instead, he's standing there, trapped in the bathroom, hoping the lock and thin wood would do what adults are supposed to do, protect him. The worst part, we never really get full closure about who it was or what they wanted. That's how real life works. Most of the time, you don't get a final act monologue, no villain reveal, just a handful of details your brain replays at 3 a.m. for the rest of your life. Years later, he looks back and realizes, that it wasn't his imagination. His survival was firing on every cylinder. The next story is about a different kind of home invasion. No kicked-in door, but in many ways, stranger. I went to one of these matchmaking parties a while back. I was tired of being alone, and I just really wanted to meet a nice guy. I'm a woman, by the way. Now, I realized that I was better off staying alone, and you'll soon find out why I feel that way. It went kind of well, and I actually ended up being asked out by someone. The guy wasn't exactly my type, if I'm being honest. I mean, he was pretty good looking, but I think that he was a little immature for me. Also, he was younger too. I decided to give him a try because he asked me out for a drive, and I thought that was a little more interesting than sitting in a coffee house sharing awkward silences. He came to pick me up in the morning. I got in his car, and we set off for our driving date. We planned on going to a little tourist location with some great views. We were going to have some lunch and then head home in the evening. It was a nice morning and afternoon. He convinced me that he wasn't as immature as I thought he was. It was a fun date. When it started to get dark out, we set about heading back to our hometown. It was when we were driving home that night that I noticed a change in his behavior. He was starting to act strange. The vibes he was putting out were very much, "I don't want you to go yet," and "please don't leave me." I put up with his neediness, expecting him to change his attitude once he noticed that it was making me uncomfortable. But he didn't change. His neediness and his bossiness were strong. The guy who had made me laugh and who I was keen to have a second date with was gone. And now a domineering and controlling guy was sat in the driving seat. We had discussed earlier how we both had work in the morning. I thought about that part of our date as I noticed how dark it was getting out. He wasn't interested in trying to converse with me any longer, nor was he interested in trying to make me smile or laugh. He had created such a horrible atmosphere in the car that I could hardly bring myself to mention to him about how late it was getting. I decided that I would ditch him as soon as I was able to get out of the car. For my plan to work, I just needed him to stop. We were going down dark country lanes. There weren't many opportunities to ask him to stop. I bided my time, and when I saw the lights of a convenience store up ahead, I said aloud the sentence I'd been practicing in my mind for the last 15 minutes. "Hey, do you mind pulling over? I want to use the bathroom," I asked. He agreed, and I thought I'd get away from this weirdo. I expected him to pull over into the convenience store's parking lot, but he zoomed past it. I said something like, "Hey, why didn't you stop?" And he replied, "I know a public restroom closer to home." I hated that. He could have easily stopped, but he didn't. He eventually did stop, but he stopped at a public bathroom in the middle of nowhere. I doubted that there would even be cell reception, but I checked my phone before getting out, and I noticed that I had a couple of bars. I figured that I would be able to guide someone to come pick me up from here, or at least share my location, so I took my chance. I got out of the car, stood up, and then stooped to pick up my handbag. I grabbed one handle of the bag and turned to walk to the bathroom. Then, I felt some resistance. It was like my bag was stuck. I looked back and saw my date was holding the other handle of my bag. I stood there, stunned. I couldn't believe that this guy could get any worse. My eyes then met his, and he said to me, "Do you really need that if you're just using the bathroom?" I just dropped my phone in my handbag, so I couldn't even grab that. I froze. I really didn't know what to do. I couldn't be left out in the middle of nowhere with no bag, no phone, and no coat. I wasn't really paying attention to what roads we'd been on, so I didn't know how long it would take me to get home. I reluctantly had to get back into that creep's car. We set off. I had to hide my fear from him. He was controlling, but he wasn't going to beat me. I didn't want him to think he had some kind of power over me. I didn't want to give him that victory. I next tried to hint that it was hot and I needed something to drink. I was surprised that he really didn't need all that much convincing. I guessed that he was thirsty too. I mean, at this point, we'd been driving around and around for a couple of hours. As we approached a convenience store, he parked up in the furthest spot away and said he would be right back. He darted out of the car, and I thought to myself, now's my chance. I tried to make a break for it as he ran into the store, but the door would not budge. He must have locked the door. He came back, and he had a big smile on his face. As soon as he opened his door, I shot across into his seat and pushed my weight against the door. This caused him to back up a bit. I told him that if he didn't leave me alone, that I would be calling the police. One of the convenience store staff members stepped out at the perfect time to take the garbage bags out and was alerted to our heated exchange. When he realized that he was being watched, he tutted at me and shook his head. He then got into his car and sped away. I called a taxi and got myself home. I was shaken up, but I tried my best to hold it together until I was behind a closed door. Then it all came out. I was really upset. I later found out when I spoke to the police about him that he stalked his ex-girlfriend and had an official police caution just a month before we went out on our driving date. It feels amazing to be saying that I got home in one piece because I truly don't know what that guy is capable of. I hope I never run into him again. If there's one thing I want you to take from our time tonight, it's this. Your discomfort is a gift. It is your internal compass pointing away from danger. Don't worry about being rude. Don't worry about overreacting. The people who belong in your life will never make you feel like you have to escape from them. Stay observant. Stay skeptical, and most importantly, stay safe. You can catch part 2 of Crazy Dating Stories over on my podcast. I'll link the details in the comments section. Thanks for listening. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps the channel. So I'll see you over on Spotify.